Today's game, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, is based on an animated series that was based on a parody horror film from the late 70s by the same name. The movie is light on the Killer Tomatoes and heavy on the situational comedy, but in terms of B-movie spoofs, it's a fun time. It even spawned a sequel a decade later, Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and stars a young George Clooney. The animated series kicked off in 1990 and follows a pre-adolescent Chad Finletter along with his fuzzy pet Tomato as they engage in bouts against the evil Dr. Gangrene, a mad scientist who created all of these killer tomatoes to start with. Tomatoes are now banned thanks to this, which cuts into Chad's bottom line as he's a pizza delivery boy despite being only 10 years old. The show lasted just 2 seasons and amassed 21 total episodes before being canceled. Not because of the glorification of child labor, but because Season 2 apparently sucked. One fun fact is that the second season of the show was the first Saturday morning cartoon to be completely computer animated. Today's game is based on the cartoon and features our guy Chad Finletter on a quest to put a stop to Dr. Gangrene's plans to launch the dreaded Doomsday Tomato. Let's see what's up with Attack of the Killer Tomatoes on the NES. Mad scientist Dr. Gangrene wants to release his Doomsday Tomato on the city of San Zucchini, and he's hired his 5 henchmen to stand in the way of Chad Finletter, the only 10-year-old boy in this town capable of stopping such a nefarious scheme. The evil henchmen tomatoes have fun names like Tomacho and Ketchup, Beefsteak, Fang, and Mamato. Good stuff. Those are the big bad tomatoes you'll meet throughout this game, but there are, more ordinary evil tomato enemies sandwiched throughout. Tomato bats, tomato rats, tomato spiders, bouncing kamikaze tomatoes, tiny ankle-biting tomatoes, on and on. As Chad bounces down the street during the opening, you'll soon realize that these maters are meant for stomping, but the hit detection is a bit inconsistent. You'll take damage if you don't land the hits perfectly, and it's worth noting that lots of enemies can be skipped or avoided, but there are others, especially in the first stage, that you'll need to jump on and vanquish in order to proceed. Other tomatoes will damage you if you try to stomp them no matter what, so there's some unfortunate trial and error here. But stomping is your only form of attack, save for one boss fight where you chuck tomatoes at a church organ. In addition to stomping tomatoes, you'll have to navigate some awkward platforming too. It's nothing too tough though, except for this level where you have to know to jump on this hardly noticeable switch so you can flip upside down. I had to consult a walkthrough to even know this switch was in the room, much less important. That said, upside down platforming is kind of fun. One other weird thing about this one, you can't run until the 3rd stage. No reason given. The in-level sequences are quite varied. Some stages don't even have actual boss fights. Here's the stage where you have to chuck tomatoes at that church organ. That's also shooting tomatoes at you. Or maybe you're throwing rocks, I don't know. And then other stage finales require you to kill every enemy in the room to advance. In another level, the action sequence to finish the level is done for you, and you just watch. In total, the game has 5 stages, and each one can be completed in a couple of minutes, tops, making this game ridiculously short once you learn where to go. A few of the stages are maze-like, especially the final stage, and that adds to the time it takes to beat it and the overall difficulty. You start with 3 lives and you get 2 continues. Extra lives can be found by venturing off course and looking for pickups, and the game is pretty forgiving with the amount of life and power-ups it doles out. Lunchboxes and lunch bags can be found all over the place that give Chad some health back. I said there were 5 stages, but if you're not careful, you might miss the last one. Spoiler alert, the game has a false ending, and if you impatiently press start to get past it, you'll miss the cutscene that takes you to the real final stage, where you have to climb the tomatoey insides of some place and make your way through a rather confusing maze to find and pluck some thing, just something, that causes the game to end. I normally don't like to spoil endings, but it's a short game, and you might miss the real ending if you're not aware of this. As for music, the game uses a version of the cartoon's theme song, which, warning, might get stuck in your head if you go give it a listen. All in all, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is a relatively simple, albeit slightly janky, platformer that doesn't last long enough to be memorable and avoids any major sequences or boss fights with giant mutant tomatoes that could have made it more interesting and fun. If you're looking for a quick beat on the NES, fire it up. Otherwise, just watch the movies and cartoon. There's an Attack of the Killer Tomatoes game on the Game Boy as well, and somewhat surprisingly, it's not a port of the NES version as you might expect, given that they share cover art. It's completely different in almost every way. If you want an in-depth look at that version, I recommend checking out Game Boyle's review and tell him who sent you. There's yet another Attack of the Killer Tomatoes game that actually predates the NES one. In 1986, an isometric puzzle version of the game released primarily in Europe on the Sinclair, Amstrad CPC, and MSX. Predating the animated series, this game is based on the first movie and features Wimp Plasbot, who works in a tomato puree plant and has to fend off the killer tomatoes. By most accounts, the game is considered pretty good. Well, that's going to do it for Attack of the Killer Tomatoes on the NES. As always, lift up the bread and check your sandwich for absolute evil, and thanks for watching.